Billionaire CEO orders steak. Black waitress hands him a note that stops him cold. The Magnolia room glittered while a storm pressed against the windows, thunder softened by velvet drapes, and moneyed laughter. Savannah's heat rode every breath, sweet and heavy, like overripe peaches. Aisha Carter threaded through candlelit tables, a tray balanced perfectly, her face calm, eyes sharp. In the corner, a man in a scuffed navy jacket watched everything without seeming to look. Marcus Langston, billionaire ghost in plain clothes, invited yet unseen. A bone-in wagyu arrived, seared dark, butter hissing around its edges. Aisha leaned as if correcting a fork angle, and slid a folded scrap beneath his hand. 2 words stared back, gouged in ink, "Don't eat." Then a second line, smaller as if written while running, "Check the bone." Crystals sang, a door swung. Grease and rosemary drifted out with a hiss, and a laugh that didn't sound like humor. Marcus lifted the knife, paused, and shifted the steak. Something tapped porcelain, metal, hidden where marrow should be. A sliver of wire glinted, wrapped with tape the color of the plate's rim. He looked up. Aisha didn't blink. From the kitchen, a timer shrieked, followed by a quiet, ugly cheer strangled fast. Marcus slid the note into his pocket and set the knife down. Appetite gone, mind clicking through possibilities. Sabotage for sport, a dare, a test, a message. Who knew he was here? Why tonight? He pictured the owner reading quarterly numbers, except he was the owner, and the room had decided he wasn't. Aisha's voice barely breath. "Office door has a camera. Watched 12 minutes ago." He rose slowly, as if the chair were made of glass, and smiled the way men in old portraits smile before duels. The storm finally broke, rain rattling the panes. Electric fear threaded the linen silence. What happens next will leave you speechless. Savannah carries its history in every breath. River air warm with salt and jasmine, as carriages roll over cobblestones that shine after late showers. Spanish moss drifting like soft banners from live oaks. On the square, the Magnolia room presents a flawless face to the street. Doors heavy, brass glowing, floors polished until chandeliers float upon their reflections. Portraits keeping stern watch, while gas lamps whisper and linen hushes plates into place. Its reputation sparkles in travel magazines, yet locals trade quieter notes about seating charts that move like weather fronts, about smiles that cool when certain guests arrive, about standards that bend around status. Marcus Langston knows rumor rarely invents cruelty. It only edits it. He walks in wearing a navy jacket with scuffed elbows and a loosened seam near the pocket. The same jacket he has dragged through airports, fundraising dinners, midnight hackathons, and hospital corridors. He is a self-made billionaire who learned computers in a library that stayed open because a tired librarian chose kindness over policy. A black kid from rural Georgia who soldered scavenged parts onto boards in a shed behind a church where his grandfather tuned tractors between fish fries. Money placed him on lists. Discipline kept him suspicious of lists. When the Magnolia room became available, he acquired it quietly through a holding company, then left the press to guess and the staff to assume. He believes truth shows itself when power hides. So he visits in plain clothes, orders simply, and watches etiquette perform its play. The hostess greets him with a smile that does not reach her eyes and leads him to a little table near swinging kitchen doors despite empty settings farther from the clatter. Every 10 seconds the corridor breathes a gust of heat and onion and steam. A metal hinge taps like a metronome behind his chair. He accepts the seat because he wants the night to tell the truth about itself. Across the room, Aisha Carter moves with practiced balance, tray steady, shoulders loose, steps placed so quietly that the crystal barely sings when she stops. She speaks just above a whisper, reads the table the way nurses read monitors, and carries an instinct for de-escalation that work never trained yet constantly requires. Her mother's cardiologist has changed medication again, the copay sliced into amounts that add up like weeds, and Aisha has paused community college for the second time, promising herself it is a pause, not surrender. She rolls coin wrappers on Sunday nights, budgets in pencil, and keeps a note by the stove that reads, "Keep going, even when the sink leaks and the neighbor's music steals sleep." She likes the craft of service, the way a table can breathe easier after a perfectly timed pour, the small choreography of knives aligned in corners squared. She does not like the group chat a line cook created, the jokes she muted, the way Victor Grayson, floor manager and gatekeeper, looks past certain people while calling others by name with a show of warmth. Training describes the restaurant as a standard bearer. Manuals specify steps for wine, bread, entrees, and desserts. Timing measured in minutes and gestures. What lives between steps cannot be printed. A party that arrives 5 minutes late is offered a table by the service corridor while better options sit empty, and an apology is delivered with a shrug. A couple that asks about allergens receives a speech about tradition before receiving a menu without their name spelled correctly. A glass that smells like soap is exchanged for a different glass entirely, heavier, cheaper, almost but not quite matching the rest. None of it breaks a rule, all of it sketches a pattern. Marcus has built a life on finding patterns others miss. So he watches, pauses, counts refills, and times the distance between a raised hand and help. Water for him arrives after a neighboring table receives a second cocktail. Bread arrives only when he folds the menu and looks toward the kitchen for a beat longer than comfortable. The server calls him buddy, then corrects to sir when he does not smile. A complimentary amuse-bouche materializes at another table, truffle fog drifting to his chair while heat from the door brushes his ankles. Victor laughs with one party, then delivers a speech about policy to a newcomer with the same request the other party had made. Aisha witnesses these currents the way a swimmer knows a riptide. She cannot always change the flow, yet she can angle her body against it. She keeps service calm, gathers dishes before frustration gathers voices, spots anxiety before it climbs into complaint, and moves with a grace that clients praise without ever quite seeing its labor. During breathers by the dish station, she does arithmetic, rent, utilities, prescriptions, bus pass, groceries, the emergency envelope tucked inside a cookbook that still smells faintly of grease from her grandmother's kitchen. Her brother wants a used car for delivery work. She keeps saying wait until insurance and repairs are realistic. He calls her stubborn. She calls it survive. Marcus opens the menu and reads the prose as carefully as one reads contracts, tasting the rhetoric and adjectives, noting what the kitchen claims about sourcing and purity, remembering that excellence is not a speech, but a habit. He feels the tug of the draft at his cuffs, and thinks about the first time a teacher told him a raised hand could change a room. He remembers pedal fans pushing heat across a church hall where he coded until mosquitoes sang louder than hymnals. He wears the jacket on purpose, because it denies him the bubble money builds and returns him to the muscles that carried him here. He wants this restaurant to be worthy of its beauty, and of everyone who walks through its doors, not only those who fit the frame of its portraits. The square outside dims as clouds gather. Rain threatens a second act. Inside, candles hold their tiny theaters while soft music threads through conversations about mergers, birthdays, and vacations scheduled to sound effortless. If a city can hold two truths at once, elegance and exclusion, this room has learned the trick and polished it. A server bypasses his table to refresh wine at a party where he arrived later. A busser removes unused plates from a couple quickly, while leaving his side plate long past the point where it is needed. None of it ruins a night. All of it signals who matter. Aisha sets down water for him with a quiet thank you, stands a beat longer than script, and asks whether he needs anything before appetizers. Her voice belongs to someone who understands urgency in clinics and kitchens. He says he is fine for now and thanks her by name, because he read the tag and because names deserve daylight. It is a small thing and yet it shifts the air between them, like opening a window in a room that has begun to stale. Victor glances over, measures the exchange and looks away toward guests he believes can compensate for the evening's effort with influence or post. Marcus lets the moment pass and resumes watching the organism move, a choreography of orders, trays, printers, and quiet calculations about whose time counts most. He thinks about the legal structure that masks his ownership, the shell that keeps cameras and bloggers from attaching his name to this room until he decides to reveal it. He wanted time to evaluate culture without fanfare or fear, to see whether the mission statements he paid to print had turned into muscle memory, or stayed mounted on walls like vintage advertisements. He suspects the Aisha checks her tables, then pauses by the service station, where another server recounts a complaint with a smirk that makes the story sound like entertainment. She keeps her face neutral, breathes through impatience, and reminds herself that a paycheck is not a favor. She texts her mother during a lull, just a heart and a promise to stop by after closing with soup, then pockets the phone before Victor notices. Her sneakers ache, yet she stands softer when she reaches an elderly couple celebrating an anniversary, refolding a napkin with hands that remember folding hospital blankets for visiting relatives years ago. Savannah's weather breaks at last, rain beginning as a hush and then finding the window panes with gentle fingers. Conversation leans closer to candlelight. Marcus studies the room as if it were a data set whose conclusions are already forming. If service is a mirror, it is reflecting exactly what he came to measure. He can feel tension building under the orchestra of clinks and murmurs, not dramatic, only present, the low hum that precedes a note you cannot ignore once it sounds. He does not know yet what will force that note into the open. He only knows the night is still choosing him and he intends to choose it back. He watches a server glide past with a wine cart and pause for a table that arrived later, the bottle cradled like a trophy while his glass waits, beads of water sliding down its side. Out beyond the drapes, the square holds carriages under oaks, drivers hunched against drizzle, hooves clicking a rhythm that belonged to another century. Aisha returns with bread, folds a corner of linen that has drifted, and steadies the wobble in a leg the maintenance log keeps promising to fix. She does it without announcing the repair, because quiet fixes are the only kind that hold in places like this. Marcus studies the portraits and thinks about names under paint, about who stood for them and who dusted them, about the distance between an era's manners and its value. He knows that ownership is not control unless attention is relentless, and that spreadsheets cannot correct what culture excuses. He adjusts his knife so the blade lies parallel with the plate's rim, a small line drawn across a private. She recovers, breathes, and keeps moving, wrists steady, eyes steady, the calculation of a life that refuses collapse. Electric air builds beneath the soft music. By the kitchen doors, a flash of stainless steel catches his eye, then vanishes. He waited. Tonight he will learn whether the Magnolia Room deserves its reverence or its rumors, and that answer will not be neutral. Now, Savannah's night pressed close, heavy with river salt and magnolia. The air inside the Magnolia Room sweet with wine and friar steam. Marcus Langston sat by the swinging doors the hostess had chosen for him, the hinge tapping his chair like a metronome. A couple at the window arrived later and already swirled a second bottle. His water sweated untouched. He wore the navy jacket that makes strangers underestimate him, because misjudgment draws maps money can't buy. Misreading him revealed the culture faster than any survey. Patterns surface when masks feel safe. He wanted the truth without the stage lights. Tonight would deliver. He ran the evening like a diagnostic latency on refills. Routing of smiles, error rates on names. Sir warped into Buddy and snapped back when he didn't play along. Humidity lifted off the kitchen with each pass. Warm as breath. Behind the doors, voices edged above pans. A line cook said a word that has broken teeth and bones, bending it into a laugh as if cruelty were seasoning. Another voice echoed, then muffled amusement. Aisha Carter froze at the pass, plates stacked inches from her wrist. She knew how sound changes when men believe the room belongs to them. Victor Grayson drifted in a smooth orbit, turning policy into charm for those who fit the portraits. While the seating chart pushed others toward noise, Aisha had learned the price of interrupting this choreography. Worse sections, closing shifts, ghosted texts, and a professionalism note. Bills refused to admire integrity. Rent, utilities, her mother's medications, the bus pass, the emergency envelope, each demanded a number, not a debate. She set her jaw, stepped aside to hide the flinch the slur triggered, and breathed through a pulse that wanted to leap into her throat. The steak order came marked Rush 14 in Victor's neat hand. There was no 14, a joke or a signal. She watched the cook handle the meat, thumb pressing into char, then lean low to whisper another slur toward the corridor. Another laughed and touched the bone with tongs like a dare. Butter hissed. Heat climbed her neck. She could pretend she hadn't heard. She could serve and swallow and go home to tell the wall above the sink what mattered. Or she could risk being noticed. Marcus kept still. He understood intent without seeing the act. The bar's smirk turned conspiratorial. When a regular requested an off-menu portion, the hostess steered a black family to the corridor with an apology shaped like policy, while 4 open settings waited in the center under perfect light. He logged everything for consequences. He would not give them a scene to consume. He would feed them their own record. Aisha moved to the host stand, tore a square from an unused receipt, and printed words with a steady hand. Don't eat. Then she added smaller lines. Blunt as truth. They used the N-word. Sabotage. Check the bone. She folded the scrap twice, then once more. If she carried it and nothing changed, Victor would bury her under rules. If she did nothing, she would drown in the knowing. The steak slid onto a tray. She timed her intercept to the busser's pivot. I've got 14, she said, using a number that brought 10 seconds. And the busser nodded because drowning people accept help without checking names. She cut left into a column's shadow that dodged cameras in the line's sight lines, slipped the folded note under the rim, and tucked a napkin over the paper, so only a hand going to the knife would find it. She breathed once and stepped back into music. The bartender's glance hopped from her to Marcus in a way. Victor straightened his cuff and adjusted his tie, already rehearsing denial. A hostess told a waiting couple the list was long. A surname opened a door. Soft piano leaned the room toward patient. Marcus lifted his glass as if tasting something complicated and set it down with deliberation. When Aisha arrived, he looked at her, not the plate. She placed the steak, aligned the fork, then paused to adjust a fold of linen that did not need fixing. The cue was so small it might have been a breath. He lifted the napkin, felt the paper, and kept his face still. The doors breathed heat again. He unfolded the scrap and read the block letters. They landed like a hammer without sound. He slid the note under the plate, took the knife by the handle, and lifted the steak a fraction. The bone caught a glint that did not belong to bone. A thin wire twist riding the curve, taped to match the rim. Anger passed through him, and condensed into something colder than rage. He did not push back his chair or signal loudly. He slid the knife farther from the meat, placed his napkin with care, and watched the bartender perform another private smirk toward the line. The part of him that built systems for scale assembled itself, ready to fuse outrage to proof. Aisha filled the waters with hands that shook only when no one looked. A co-worker murmured, "Leave it." She did not answer. She weighed the price of trouble against the cost of silence, and decided truth was a bill she would pay. She would not let this place make her complicit. She drifted near Marcus's table as if checking bread. Without moving his eyes from the room, he said, "Thank you." 2 words steadied her more than she expected. She let her lips barely part. Camera above the office. 12 minutes. Saying it aloud felt like stepping into open air with a target pinned to her back. Rain tested the windows, ghosting the edges. Inside, deals murmured. Anniversaries toasted. Strangers measured watches and shoes. The hierarchy lay over everything like architecture. Bar first, regulars second. Portraits, reflections third. Everyone else somewhere beneath the hinge. Marcus rose, not fast, not slow, just certain. He set the folded napkin down like a square of ice, nodded once to Aisha, and turned toward the corridor. The room did not realize anything had happened. It would. He moved with the quiet of a man who knows which wires to pull and how far a building falls when they get. Have you ever seen injustice at work? Share below. Aisha exhaled and continued her route with practiced calm. Refold a napkin, catch a wobbling glass before it rang, rescue a busser from a tower of plates, reassure a couple confused by a menu note that pretended to be tradition. She braced for the tap on her shoulder that would come with a smile stretched over a warning. She also allowed a picture to form, a result that did not end with her being punished for other people's choices. The doors breathed butter and wine. Victor slipped toward the office, face ready for war or charm, whichever kept the story tidy. Marcus disappeared down the corridor, as if he belonged behind every door in the building. The Magnolia room purred on, unaware the night had pivoted, that patience had weaponized, and that the hinge behind one chair had been timing a reckoning rather than a song. The note shook in Marcus's hand like it carried a charge. He flattened it once and read the jagged lines carved deep by a hand that had forced itself not to tremble. They used the N-word, "Your meal's tainted. Check the bone." The letters looked angry and scared at the same time. Ink pooled at corners as if pressed in a hurry. Urgency bruised onto paper. For a clean, merciless beat, everything narrowed to the scrap. His pulse, his breath, heat flickered, then fell into a colder place he trusted more than fire. He placed the knife down carefully, folded his napkin with a surgeon's calm, and kept his face a mask. The Magnolia room sparkled on. Crystal singing, silver whispering, gaslight flattering portraits of men who never washed their own plates. A laugh broke near the bar, too loud, the kind that announces ownership. He slid the note under his palm, lifted the steak with 2 tines, and saw a faint glint riding the curve of bone, where marrow should gleam. A thin wire twist, taped to match the rim. Fury condensed into focus. Aisha Carter stood 3 tables away, wiping a glass that did not need wiping, eyes on the men who believed the room belonged to them. She had written the warning in block letters, so no one could pretend not to understand. If Victor saw, she could lose shifts, then hours, then rent, then the thin thread holding her mother's meds in place. The calculation was brutal and simple. Pay with money later or pay with dignity now. The slur had floated from the line like steam, casual, bored, tossed to impress a cruel audience. The chef had leaned over the plate, spat, laughed, then taped that wire along bone with the precision of someone who thought craftsmanship could launder contempt. She had felt the old familiar shake begin at her wrists and press toward her throat. She had told herself to breathe, then moved anyway. Marcus rose. No hurry, no noise. The hinge behind his chair clicked once and stopped. He walked the corridor with the steady, contained gait of a man who has rehearsed the moment when evidence replaces outrage. The carpet muffled the sound. The office door stood ajar for airflow, camera perched above the frame, blinking its indifferent light. Inside, a monitor threw a pale rectangle across a desk that still carried a plastic cup, sweating onto a vineyard coaster. The chair held the imprint of someone who had left before finishing a sentence in the logbook. He closed the door and walked straight to the controls. He scrolled backward 12 minutes. 13. The kitchen widened on screen, stainless under tired bulbs, steam like gauze. He watched hands move with the ordinary grace of practiced labor, then watched them The chef leaned over a rib cap and let contempt fall into it, like a ritual, lid lowered, with a satisfied pat. A line cook unspooled tape matching the plate's rim and wound a thin wire along the bone as if crowning a prize. The word came again, lazy and sharpened by boredom. Laughter followed, too quick and too sure. A hand flicked a towel with a flourish, a small, cruel victory dance in the middle of service. Another staffer glanced straight into the lens, smirked and turned away as if nothing was watching. He replayed the sequence 2 times, then 3, isolating angles the way he once isolated edge cases in a code base, while box fans pushed swamp heat across folding tables in a church basement. He nudged the audio until the consonants carried. He marked times. Skips appeared like missing teeth. Tiny jumps where seconds vanished. Someone had trimmed the narrative, confident the cut would erase the crime. The office camera disagreed. It watched a hand reach the keyboard. It watched a wrist with a half-moon scar hover beside the delete key. It watched a pause long enough to take a breath and believe the world would cooperate. The logbook lay open under that same hand. 10-stroke, arrested mid-loop. Sloppiness loves power. Power teaches sloppiness to relax. He documented without flourish. Frames where spit hovered above me. A close shot where wire rode ivory. The chef's shoulder angle. The hand at the keys. The tiny scar. The blinking camera. The cup in its ring. The console clock. He photographed the open logbook at a tilt that caught both time and ink. He sent a silent ping to a secure number that existed for nights like this. A breadcrumb rather than a flare. The room did not need noise. It needed proof that would survive morning light. And he returned the chair to its exact angle, wiped a bead of condensation with the edge of the folded note so no one could claim he had been careless, and opened the door. Heat and rosemary hit him. Victor's voice floated near the host stand, wrapped in policy and performance. Their shoulders nearly touched. "Everything to your liking, sir," Victor asked, smile prepared to edit reality. Marcus looked at him once, a flat, steady look that made the next sentence die in his throat. The manager's smile tightened, recalibrated, and drifted toward a table that had already forgiven him for everything because their wine was complimentary. Marcus continued to his seat, stillness moving through velvet air like a blade concealed in cloth. Aisha kept pacing her rotes because labor steadies terror. A candle sputtered too high, she trimmed the wick. A new server faltered under a tower of glasses. She slid a palm beneath the top one and saved the lean without fanfare. A couple wanted poetry with oysters. She gave them rain tide, granite, zinc. She did not check the office. She watched the line of Marcus's shoulders. He sat, set his phone face down on linen, squared his fork parallel to the plate's rim, and unfolded the note again. Not because he needed words, but because honoring risk requires repetition. She approached his table as if checking bread. "Thank you," he said, voice low and even. "Office camera," she whispered. Above the door, 12 minutes. She placed a fresh glass and left before fear could rearrange her face. Thunder rolled over the square outside. Inside, the Magnolia Room performed tradition. Birthdays sung off-key. Business confessions, murmured behind hands. Servers moving like choreography that had learned where money sat and where patience was expected. Yet the polish felt thinner now, like lacquer gone brittle. Marcus watched Victor glide, watched a bartender perform mirth seasoned with malice for patrons who liked their humor salted with the small degradations that make certain people feel taller. His own anger cooled into something blade bright. He touched the pocket where the note warmed against his chest. The paper felt like tempered steel folded small. He pictured the morning. Cloud backups recovered before anyone woke up. Enough to argue. Council at 8, compliance at 9. A roster mapped to timestamps and gaps. Calls to investors who understood that culture is not overhead. An afternoon meeting with Aisha in daylight, where fear would have fewer places to hide, where she would say exactly what she saw and choose her future without glancing over her shoulder. A kitchen rebuilt from floor to ceiling, not as a theater but as a place where nobody had to memorize exits to stay safe. He did not want spectacles. He wanted the truth to make a sound loud enough to carry through the doors. She floated through her section and felt resolve clean itself of panic. Power had crossed the room, wearing a scuffed jacket, and met her at eye level. That alone shocked her. She had watched men with resources purchase distance. Tonight someone used power to come closer to harm. Her chest loosened. She poured water for an elderly couple. The woman lifted a thin hand and showed a ring from a summer that existed before Aisha was born. Bless you, the woman whispered, and the words settled across Aisha's shoulders like armor. She turned and met Marcus's gaze. He did not flinch. He did not telegraph for a rescue. He offered steadiness. Have you ever witnessed a small act of courage that reshaped a room? Comment now. The hinge behind his chair ticked like a metronome counting down to consequence. He lifted his glass, sipped, tasted copper because anger and truth sometimes share a flavor, and set it down. He would not shout. He would not stage a scene for anyone's entertainment. He would raise standards until pretense failed and let evidence walk into the light without histrionic. He would allow the laughter from the kitchen to meet itself again, this time beside a badge, an affidavit and a press microphone. He would not hurry. Haste is what guilty men use to hide. He slid the note into his breast pocket and felt it warm against his skin. The lines were unsteady, the meaning impossible to distort. Someone had risked income to keep his dignity from being fed to a joke. For years, he had learned that revolutions often hinge on movements smaller than a breath. A scrap slid under a palm, a decision to wait 10 minutes before speaking, a door left slightly open. Around them crystal chimed. Beyond the drapes, rain tapped the windows like a patient coat. Somewhere down the hall a cursor blinked over an unfinished word. Marcus rested both hands flat on the linen, fingers relaxed, pulse steady. He had the note, the images, the sound, the hand on the keyboard, the meal that would not be eaten, and the witness who deserved more than gratitude. The Magnolia Room still believed in its invincibility. That belief would not survive the night. He breathed once, deep and even, and let the room keep pretending it was safe. Then he lifted his eyes toward the corridor where Victor had vanished, and listened to the hinge tick off another second. The reckoning had already started. Marcus returned to the humid corridor. Note pressed against his chest like a fuse. The Magnolia Room kept glittering as if unaware a storm was forming under its own chandeliers. He pushed open the office door where the camera perched above like a silent witness. The air inside was thicker, the windows sealed, the blinds heavy. A desk fan rattled but gave no relief. Victor Grayson turned in his chair with a practiced smile that bent under the weight of Marcus's stare. Everything satisfactory, sir, Victor began. Tone oily, a hand adjusting his tie as if formality could bury reality. Marcus closed the door slowly, each click sharpening the silence. He stepped forward, no wasted motion, eyes level, jacket falling open just enough for the light to catch his cufflink. The only sign of wealth he allowed tonight. You know who I am, Marcus said. Not loud, not fast. The words landed with weight, shaking Victor harder than a shout. Sweat pooled already at the base of his hairline. The manager's smile stuttered, then collapsed. Mr. Langston, of course. I didn't realize. That, Marcus cut in, voice flat, is why I come in like this. To see what happens when I'm not announced. He slid the folded note across the desk with 2 fingers. Victor hesitated, eyes twitching, before reading. His throat bobbed, color draining. Marcus leaned closer. The camera above this door caught everything. The chef, the wire, the word. Victor's hand fluttered toward the keyboard, then pulled back. His knuckles gleamed with sweat. I'm sure perhaps there's been some misunderstanding. Security footage cycles. It doesn't always Don't, Marcus said. A single syllable, cold as steel. Show me the files. Victor turned the monitor, fingers fumbling the mouse. The screen flickered, footage rolling backward. The kitchen appeared, steam, pans, movement, then skips. Seconds missing like torn pages. You see, Victor tried, voice shaking into salesmanship. Corrupted, happens often. Heat, humidity, old system. Marcus didn't blink. Cloud backups don't sweat. Show me. Victor's pulse stammered in his throat. Tie damp, shirt clinging. He clicked. Error messages blooming. Unrecoverable data. His voice pitched higher, desperate. Marcus lowered himself into the chair across the desk. Posture controlled. I built the system you tried to erase. I have redundancy, layered deeper than your excuses. Every missing frame exists elsewhere. He let silence spread. Let Victor feel the inevitability pressing heavier than the air. Victor reached for a glass of water, his hand shaking, spilling half on his sleeve. We can resolve this quietly. The staff boys get carried away. Language, nothing meant. Marcus cut in again, spitting in food, wiring bones, deleting evidence. That's not carried away. That's culture. And culture starts with management. Victor sagged, jaw slack. He had relied on charm for years, smoothing over slurs with policies, hiding malice behind polished menus. Now charm met stone. Marcus leaned forward, voice lower, more dangerous. You had a chance to run a restaurant with dignity. Instead, you presided over it. I don't raise my voice because I don't need to. Power isn't volume. Power is a consequence. The fan rattled, pushing stale heat. Victor's forehead glistened. His eyes darted toward the door, then back. Marcus didn't move. You'll give me every password, every login, every file path. You'll do it now. Victor swallowed, opened a drawer, slid a notepad across, scribbling with frantic strokes. Sweat smeared ink. He handed it over without meeting eye. Marcus took the page, folded it neatly, and tucked it into his jacket. You'll stay here until I say otherwise. When I walk out, you won't call anyone, won't move, won't breathe louder than you need to. Victor's voice cracked. What are you going to do? Marcus rose, straightening the navy jacket that suddenly looked like armor. He turned at the door. What I always do, build something stronger after dismantling weakness. His stare cut once more, cold enough to freeze. And make sure nobody thinks spitting on dignity is sport. The air seemed to thin as he left. Victor collapsed against the chair, drenched hollow, knowing the tide had shifted against him, forever. Outside, the Magnolia room purred on, glasses clinking, laughter flowing. None of them yet knew the ground had cracked beneath the polished floor. Ever stood up to power? Tell us below. Aisha moved through the dining room, with plates balanced, eyes flicking toward Marcus. As he returned from the corridor, he carried silence like a storm contained, his steps measured, gaze cutting through chandeliers and marble. He no longer blended. He no longer needed to. The facade of anonymity had been shed. Authority had arrived, and the Magnolia room would never breathe the same again. Marcus stepped out of the suffocating office with Victor still collapsed in his chair, and the humid corridor seemed almost cleaner for the first time that night. He didn't pause. He already knew what had to come next. Proof was currency, and he had it. But proof had to be secured before frightened hands erased it. He slid his phone from the inside pocket of his jacket and tapped a string of commands into an encrypted channel. The device chimed with a muted tone, a signal routed through layers of protection his engineers had built years ago for moments where truth risked vanishing. Within minutes, his private team, discreet professionals bound by loyalty, not contracts, was pulling the backups from a secure cloud archive. The Magnolia room systems, quietly upgraded after his acquisition, had mirrored feeds pushed through hidden redundancies. Where Victor thought deletion meant victory, Marcus had built resurrection. On the phone screen, thumbnail after thumbnail began to cue hazy frames, sharpening into color sound files, loading with their distorted peaks. He watched a progress bar crawl forward, patient, deliberate. He slid back into his seat in the dining room, the hum of chandeliers overhead. Aisha Carter noticed him return, her pulse rising though her hand stayed steady. She moved to another table, poured water, and pretended her chest wasn't tightening. Every second, she expected Victor's hand on her shoulder, a manufactured violation pinned on her as an excuse for firing. She feared the smear campaign more than the lost wages. Whispers, false stories, the quiet blacklist passed among managers. Yet she reminded herself she'd already chosen. Silence was complicity, and she'd lived too long under its weight. Marcus glanced down as files finished syncing. He slipped in a discreet earpiece and watched footage spool onto his screen. The first clip, a server deliberately dropping a bread roll onto the floor, smirking as he placed it back into a basket bound for a black couple at table 9. The second, a bartender whispering a slur while pouring whiskey, ice clinking against glass, his grin proud as the guest lifted the drink unknowingly. The third, the chef again, sneering, fingers pressed into the meat with contempt, laughter breaking behind him like applause. Each frame was timestamped and each slur was clear enough to break stone. He flagged clips, cataloged them, encrypted copies, and uploaded redundancies into 3 separate vaults across continents. No erasure could undo what had been sealed. He watched the log of slurs stretch longer than he expected, weeks of abuse woven into the Magnolia room's culture like mold in wood grain. His jaw flexed, eyes narrowing, but his hands remained precise. Cold fury was power, reckless anger was weakness. Across the floor, Aisha delivered entree to a family, smiling gently as she cut through their awkwardness. They didn't know she was trembling inside. That fear gnawed at her while she steadied plate. She thought of her mother at home, the pill bottles lined up by the sink, the voice that told her daily, courage is expensive, but sometimes it pays interest. Tonight she gambled her livelihood on that principle. Marcus lifted his gaze, meeting hers for a brief moment. It was enough. He wanted her to know she wasn't alone in the fire. She drew breath deeper than before, straightened, and returned to the corridor, shoulders squared. The feed on his phone shifted to new clip. A dishwasher, barely older than a teenager, was mocked with racist nicknames until his ears flushed red. A sous chef, exasperated but silent, turned away rather than intervene. The staff laughed, tossed towels like whips, and moved on. Marcus noted timestamps again, his expression tightening. What emerged wasn't a single offense but a network of cruelty sanctioned by habit. Patterns build culture, and this culture had calcified around degradation. He dialed a second number, secure, voice low but clipped. Package 1 secure. Cross-check with storage node B. Duplicate everything off-site. A calm voice on the other end confirmed. Already working. The team would spin the files into protected formats. Impossible to tamper with without leaving scars. Soon lawyers, regulators, and the press would see that. But tonight required more than exposure. It demanded protection for the witness, who had risked everything. Aisha passed near his table again. Marcus spoke just above silence. Walk with me when you're off shift. His tone wasn't a request. She nodded, heart knocking, but relief hidden behind discipline. She had wanted assurance, some thread of safety. Victor's shadow appeared at the corridor's edge, sweat still darkening his collar. He scanned the room, eyes narrowing when he saw Marcus calm, upright, unshaken. That calm was more dangerous than rage. Marcus didn't acknowledge him. He let Victor drown in his own panic. Back on the screen, more videos cycled, plates swapped with deliberate neglect, side comments under breath, the kitchen roaring with laughter when a guest complained. Every abuse was time-stamped, cross-referenced and undeniable. Marcus saved each file, each moment of contempt. His fury was no longer private. It had transformed into a strategy. Aisha leaned against the dish station for a breath, feeling the tremor return. A server muttered near her, always trying to play hero. She ignored it, but the words cut sharply. She reminded herself, she had already chosen, and Marcus had already seen. If retaliation came, it would meet resistance. Marcus closed the last file, encrypted the batch, and slid his phone back into his pocket. He looked across the restaurant, the velvet curtains, the chandeliers, the antebellum portraits that presided like judges. He saw the truth, beauty disguising rot, polish masking cruelty. That mask had cracked. Soon it would shatter. He folded his napkin once more, rose and moved toward the exit, brushing past Victor without a glance. The manager stammered half a greeting, but it dissolved against the wall of Marcus's silence. Aisha, tray balanced, followed him with her eyes, resolve replacing fear in her chest. The investigation was complete in substance, if not in public. Truth had been captured, preserved, and sharpened. What remained was to wield. Justice loomed over the Magnolia room like thunder beyond glass, certain and unstoppable. What small act of courage have you witnessed that changed everything? Comment now.